Talvesi Renquo had removed 3 species from the Galactic Concord in his 400 years of service. He considered it gardening. You pulled the weed before it strangled the flowers. Simple. Clean. He sat in his observation pod above the grand chamber, a structure carved into the hollow core of a dead moon, and watched 4,311 delegations settle into their seats. The chamber hummed with the sound of 10,000 translators working at once, converting speech into meaning across biological architectures that had nothing in common except ambition. The Cthulan delegation buzzed in low harmonic clusters. The Scythe sat like granite monuments, their 6 limbs folded in patterns that meant either patience or murder, depending on the angle. Somewhere in the 3rd tier, a Pelori delegate was already asleep, its gas sac body inflating and deflating with long, wet snores. Talvesi's aide, a young amphibian named Koro, leaned in. The Earth delegation has arrived. How many? 1. Talvesi blinked his inner eyelids. Every prior expulsion target had brought armies of lawyers, translators, economists, and at least one individual whose only job was to weep at the podium. Earth sent 1 woman. Her name was Dalise Rowanhorse. She walked into the chamber the way someone walks into a restaurant where they have a reservation. Not fast, not slow. She wore a dark jacket and flat shoes and carried nothing except a small notebook. She found her seat, the single chair reserved for the accused species, positioned at the lowest point of the chamber so that every delegation looked down at it, and sat. She crossed one leg over the other. She opened her notebook and wrote something. Talvesi watched her through his magnification lens. She was writing a grocery list. The formal charges took 2 hours to read. Cultural incompatibility, unauthorized trade channels, failure to file innovation disclosures, persistent use of humor during arbitration proceedings. This one drew murmurs from the Pelori, who had no concept of humor and found the charge baffling. The Dromene delegation added a personal grievance. A human diplomat had once described their mating ritual as aggressively festive, and the phrase had spread across 3 sectors. Roanhorse listened to all of it. She didn't interrupt. She didn't take notes. She didn't whisper to a legal team because she didn't have one. At one point, she tilted her head like she was listening to music no one else could hear. When the charges concluded, the senior arbiter, Talvesi himself, descended to the chamber floor and activated the formal address protocol. The accused species is granted the right of final statement before the vote. Ambassador Roanhorse, the floor recognizes Earth. The chamber went quiet in the way that large spaces go quiet. Not all at once, but in a wave, silence spreading outward from the podium, like a ripple in deep water. "Thank you," she said. She looked around the chamber. 4,000 species, 10,000 eyes, sensory organs that detected heat, pressure, magnetic fields, emotional pheromones, and in the case of the Vithari, the faint electrical discharge of living thought. Every instrument pointed at her. "We understand," she said. "No hard feelings. You've been lovely." She sat down. Talvesi waited. Koro waited. The entire chamber waited. The translators hummed, converting her words into 4,000 languages, each one searching for the cultural equivalent of no hard feelings, and in most cases, failing. Nothing else came. The vote was called. It passed unanimously. 4,311 delegations pressed their confirmation signals, and the Grand Chamber's central display turned the color that meant removal. A deep, institutional blue that Talvesi had seen 3 times before. The color of done. Roanhorse stood, tucked her notebook into her jacket, and walked toward the exit. Her shoes made small, flat sounds on the stone floor. In a chamber designed to make individuals feel like insects, she moved like she was leaving a coffee shop. She stopped. Talvesi's second stomach clenched. Here it comes, he thought. The turn, the threat, the promise of revenge wrapped in diplomatic language. Every species broke at the door. The Veshani had wept. The Krulaks had screamed an oath of blood across 9 generations. The Thessi had simply gone rigid and had to be carried out by medical drones. The door was where dignity went to die. Roanhorse looked up at the ceiling. Who designed this chamber? She asked. Koro, standing near the exit, blinked. The Orandai, during the second founding. It's beautiful, she said. The acoustics are perfect. Every seat can hear the podium without amplification. The Orandai were masters of resonance architecture, Koro said, because he didn't know what else to say. Roanhorse pulled out her notebook and wrote something down. The name. She was writing down the name of the species that designed the room. Thank you, she said to Koro. She smiled at him. It was a real smile, the kind that reached the eyes and stayed there a moment too long. And Koro would think about it for years without understanding why. She left. The chamber remained quiet for 11 seconds. Talvesi counted. In 400 years of council proceedings, he had never heard the Grand Chamber hold silence after a vote. There was always noise. Celebration from the coalition that won, protests from the margins, the general digestive sounds of 10,000 bodies processing relief. But this silence was different. It had weight. It pressed against the walls of the dead moon like something trying to get out. The Scythe delegation leader turned to his military attaché and said something that the translators logged but did not broadcast. Talvesi, who had access to all translation logs, read it later that evening. That was wrong, the Scythe leader had said. Not wrong as in unjust, wrong as in incorrect. As in a calculation that produces a number that is technically valid but makes no sense in context. Wrong the way a predator feels when the prey animal stops running and just stands there, looking back at you, calm, breathing slow, like it knows something about the next 30 seconds that you do not. Talvesi filed the expulsion as routine. He categorized it under standard removal, subtype C, cultural divergence. He tagged it with the expected follow-up flag. Most expelled species petitioned for re-entry within 1.7 galactic cycles. He set a reminder in his calendar. He poured himself a glass of mineral water and sat in his office above the empty chamber. The lights had been dimmed to conservation mode. The great room below was dark, except for the blue glow of the central display. Still showing the vote result, still broadcasting the word that meant finished, complete, over. His aide knocked. Arbiter? Anything else tonight? Talvesi looked at the grocery list Roanhorse had left on her chair. Someone from the cleaning crew had brought it to him, thinking it was a document. It read, milk, peppers, that good bread from the place on 5th. Call Mom. That will be all. He sat in the dark for a long time. Somewhere, a ship carrying one woman and a notebook entered a slipstream corridor aimed at a small blue planet on the unfashionable edge of the galaxy. Gen Osar noticed the decimal first. She was a Kethalan trade analyst, which meant she spent her days inside numbers the way fish spend their days inside water, not thinking about them, just breathing them. The Concord's predictive economic model had been 99.97% accurate for 12 centuries. It mapped the flow of goods, resources, and debts across 4,311 species with a precision that bordered on prophecy. Wars had been predicted by the model before the first shots were fired. Famines had been prevented. Entire civilizations had risen and fallen inside its margins. 3 cycles after Earth's expulsion, the accuracy dropped to 99.91%. Nobody cared. Gen Asar cared the way a surgeon cares about a heartbeat that skips once. It could be nothing. It could be the first flutter before the collapse. She filed a report. Her supervisor, a massive Kethalan drone named Voss 3, read it, flagged it as within acceptable deviation, and went back to calculating grain futures for the Pylori corridor. She went back to the decimal. She sat with it. She pulled it apart, the way her species pulled apart dead wood, mandible by mandible, layer by layer, until the structure underneath revealed itself. The variance was not random. It clustered around trade routes that passed through or near Sol sector. Not the routes themselves. Those had been reassigned after the expulsion, rerouted through Scythe-controlled corridors, like blood vessels bypassing a dead limb. The variants clustered around the edges of those routes, the margins, the places where formal trade ended and informal exchange began. Earth was still trading. This should not have been possible. An expelled species lost access to the Concord's trade infrastructure. The relay stations, the currency exchanges, the insurance protocols that made interstellar commerce viable. Without those systems, trade was like trying to swim without water. You could move your arms, but you weren't going anywhere. Gen Asar pulled the data. Earth was not using the Concord's infrastructure. Earth was building its own. The transactions were small, tiny even. A shipment of synthetic textiles to a pre-industrial world in the Ven Reach. A batch of agricultural enzymes traded to a species called the Morai, who had been denied Concord membership 4 times due to insufficient technological development. Medical supplies, human medical supplies, designed for carbon-based biology, sent to a mining colony that the Concord had classified as economically non-viable and abandoned. Each transaction by itself was insignificant. A rounding error, a crumb. Gen Asar mapped them. The pattern that emerged made her stop eating for 2 days. It was not a trade network. Trade networks had centers, hubs, points of control where flow could be regulated and taxed, and if necessary, cut off. The Concord's network was a wheel. The council at the hub, major species on the spokes, everyone else on the rim. Remove the hub, and the wheel collapsed. This was by design. It kept the council necessary. What Earth had built was not a wheel. It had no hub. It had no spokes. It looked on Gen Asar's display like the root system of a plant. Thousands of thin connections spreading in every direction. Each one small, each one redundant, each one capable of rerouting around damage. You could cut any 10 connections and the network would not notice. You could cut any 100. The thing was alive, the way moss was alive. It didn't depend on any single part of itself. She counted the species involved, most of them unknown to the Concord. Pre-spaceflight civilizations that humanity had contacted, taught, and traded with in the 3 cycles since expulsion. Species that had never heard of the Galactic Concord, and therefore owed it nothing. Gen Asar went deeper. She pulled Earth's technology-sharing records from their 11 years of Council membership. Every species was required to log innovations in the Concord's central registry, a transparency measure designed to prevent arms races and ensure shared progress. During their membership, Earth had filed 340 innovations per cycle. Respectable, slightly above average for a young species. She cross-referenced the filings against Earth's actual deployment data, technologies they had used publicly during the same period. The deployment number was 1,147 per cycle. Humans had been filing less than a third of what they built. Gen Asar sat with this number for a long time. Her mandibles clicked in the pattern her species used when processing something that did not fit existing categories. Not distress, not fear. The clicking sound a Cthulhan made when it encountered a structure it could not reduce to components. She thought about what this meant. For 11 years, humanity had sat inside the Concord system, followed its rules, filed its paperwork, attended its meetings, laughed at its formalities, and quietly kept 2/3 of its ideas to itself. Not hidden, not stolen, just kept. The way a person keeps a thought they're not ready to share yet. The way a seed sits in dry soil and waits. She presented her findings to the Economic Subcommittee on a Tuesday. She used charts. She used projections. She showed them the root network and explained that it was growing at a rate that would connect an estimated 300 species within 2 cycles. She showed them the variance. They kept poor records during their worst moments. One thing stood out. She found a word in their biological sciences, mycelium. It described the underground network of a fungal organism, a web of threads that connected plants across vast distances, sharing nutrients, sending chemical warnings, redistributing resources from areas of abundance to areas of need. The individual threads were fragile. The network was nearly indestructible. It had existed on Earth for over 1 billion years, outlasting every empire, every extinction, every catastrophe the planet had thrown at it. Humanity had not invented a new kind of trade network. They had copied one from their own dirt. Genasar looked at her display. The root system pulsed faintly, as new connections formed in real time. A Morai mining cooperative linking with a Venreach agricultural collective, both routed through a human relay station that probably looked like a shipping container with an antenna bolted to it. She turned off her display. She walked to the window of her office, which looked out over the Concord's capital station, a structure of crystal and engineered light that had taken 300 years and 50 species to build. It was, by any measure, the most impressive thing in the galaxy. Below it, in the dark, the roots were growing. Genasar went home. She did not sleep well. She would not sleep well for a long time. The model dropped to 99.79% by morning. Nobody noticed. Nobody except the one analyst who understood that accuracy, like trust, does not collapse all at once. It erodes, decimal by decimal. By the time anyone thinks to check, the foundation is already sand. Vreth Kal Amon had killed 11 species in his career. Not individuals, species. Entire civilizations reduced to ash and footnotes, because they had made the error of standing where the Scythe Dominion wished to walk. He was 6-limbed, silicon-based, and moved with the slow certainty of a landslide. His people had been the Concord's enforcer caste for 9 centuries. When diplomacy failed, the Scythe did not. He had been the loudest voice calling for Ernst's expulsion. Humans were disruptive, unpredictable. They laughed during sessions that determined the fates of billions, and brought food to meetings where food was not permitted. They had once, in a moment of what they called breaking the ice, attempted to teach a Scythe diplomat to dance. The diplomat had filed a formal complaint. Vreth had filed a secondary complaint about the first complaint being insufficient. Now, 6 cycles after the expulsion, Vreth was being sent to talk to them by the Dominion's own intelligence bureau. 3 Scythe vassal species, civilizations bound to the Dominion by centuries-old protection treaties, had opened back-channel communications with Earth. The channels were not encrypted. They were not hidden. They were simply there, operating in the open, like humanity could not be bothered to be sneaky about it. Vreth's orders were clear. Go to the Sol system, make contact with humanity, and reassert Dominion authority over its client species. Remind the humans that treaties existed. Remind them that the Scythe existed. Close the channels. His warship dropped out of Slipstream near Saturn. It was a Dreadnought-class vessel, 4 kilometers long, carrying enough firepower to convert a small continent into glass. It announced itself on all standard frequencies with the Scythe Identification Protocol, a deep, resonant pulse that most species interpreted, correctly, as a polite way of saying, "Notice me, or I will make you." Titan Station answered, a human voice, female, cheerful, speaking through what sounded like a mouthful of food. "Scythe vessel, welcome to Titan Station. Docking Bay 7 is open. Watch the yellow posts, we just painted them." Vreth docked. He expected a military installation, hard walls, weapon scanners, armed guards with the dead eyes of people paid to kill, and the discipline not to do it unnecessarily. He stepped off his shuttle and found a market. The corridor outside the docking bay opened into a wide, bright space filled with stalls, tables, and noise. A species he did not recognize, short, fur-covered, with too many fingers, was arguing with a human woman over the price of dried fruit. Two Morai children chased each other between the legs of a Pelori merchant, who was, for the first time in Vreth's experience, awake. A human man with gray hair playing a small stringed instrument. The sound was terrible. Everyone seemed to enjoy it anyway. Nobody looked at Vreth. A Scythe military strategist in full ceremonial armor, 6 limbs visible, each one capable of punching through hull plating, standing in the middle of a market where children were screaming about a ball. And nobody looked at him. He was escorted to a meeting room by a young human who introduced herself as Priya, Logistics. Sorry about the mess. We had a birthday party in here yesterday. The room contained a rectangular table, 8 chairs of varying sizes and designs, none of them matched, and a machine in the corner that Priya called a coffee maker. She offered him a cup. He declined. She shrugged and made one for herself. His name was Kofi. He was mid-30s, dark-skinned, with a calm face and a shirt that displayed an image of a small earth animal, a cat. The cat appeared to be sleeping. So did Kofi's entire energy. He shook Vreth's hand, a human greeting that required touching, which most species found revolting, and sat down. So, Kofi said, what can we do for you? Vreth laid it out. The Dominion had detected unauthorized communication between Titan Station and 3 Scythe vassal species. These species were bound by treaty to conduct all external diplomacy through Dominion channels. Earth's contact with them was a violation of interstellar law. Kofi nodded. It would be, if we were still in the Concord. The treaties exist regardless of membership. Do they? Kofi sipped his coffee. Your treaties reference the Concord's legal framework. We're not in that framework. Your vassal species reached out to us through open channels. We sold them water purification kits and crop rotation guides. If that's a declaration of war, I'd argue your treaties need editing. Vreth felt something he was not accustomed to feeling. It took him a moment to identify it. It was the sensation of being in a conversation where his rank meant nothing. The Scythe Dominion was the most feared military power in the galaxy. Species surrendered at the sight of a Scythe warship. Diplomats trembled. Politicians made concessions before Vreth even stated his demands. Kofi drank his coffee and waited. Vreth shifted approach. The Dominion could enforce compliance, he said. He said it the way he had said it 100 times before, in 100 rooms, to 100 species who understood what the sentence meant. It meant, we can break you. You could, Kofi said. He put down his cup. But this station has 40 species on it right now. 3 of them are being courted by the Concord for membership. You glass this place. You're not just hitting us, you're hitting them. That's a lot of angry ambassadors, a lot of emergency sessions, a lot of attention on the Dominion, at a time when, he paused, smiled, well, at a time when maybe the Dominion doesn't want attention. Vreth said nothing. Also, Kofi added, we make really good coffee. Seems a waste. The meeting lasted another 40 minutes. Vreth made demands. Kofi acknowledged them politely, explained why they didn't apply, and offered alternatives. He suggested that the Dominion's vassal species might benefit from the trade relationship, and that this would strengthen, not weaken, the Dominion's position. He used words like partnership and mutual benefit, and no reason this can't work for everyone. He meant all of them. After the meeting, Vreth returned to his shuttle and accessed the Dominion's intelligence file on Titan Station. He pulled the defense assessment. Weapons platforms? None. Fleet presence? None. Shield generators? None. Point defense systems? None. The station was naked. He read the file twice, Then a third time. A structure housing 40 species, positioned at a critical trade junction, with no military protection of any kind. It was insane. It was stupid. It was the kind of decision that got civilizations killed. Except it wouldn't. Because Titan Station was the only neutral trading post in the sector. Every species within range needed it. The Morai needed it for medical supplies. The Ven Reach colonies needed it for agricultural tech. 3 Concord applicant species conducted their primary off-world trade through its docking bays. Even the Dominion's own vassal species were using it, which was why Vreth was here in the first place. You could destroy Titan Station. Any competent military could do it in under an hour. But the species who destroyed it would become the enemy of everyone who depended on it. Humanity had built a structure that was safer without weapons than any fortress in the galaxy. They had turned vulnerability into armor, need into a shield. Vreth wrote his report on the flight home. He stated in clear and precise Sith military language that Earth posed no direct threat to the Dominion. He classified it at the highest level. Then he sat with it for a long time, his 6 limbs perfectly still, his silicon body humming at a frequency that meant deep processing. He added a footnote, 1 line. Recommend sustained observation. Their model is contagious. He filed the report. He dimmed the lights. He stared at the viewport and watched the stars move. On the walk back to his shuttle, before the meeting, before the report, before any of it, a human child had run around a corner and crashed into Vreth's lower left leg. The child was small, maybe 5 Earth years. It bounced off his armored limb, landed on its back, looked up at a 6-limbed silicon predator that could crush it with a thought, and said, "Sorry, mister." Then it got up and ran away, laughing. No child had ever been unafraid of Vreth, not once in his career. Not the children of allies, not the children of conquered species who had grown up in the Dominion's shadow. Fear was the correct response to a Scythe warrior. It was biological. It was rational. It was the universe, working as it should. The child had not been brave. Bravery required the recognition of danger. The child had simply not registered Vreth as something to fear. He was furniture. He was a wall it had bumped into, an obstacle between it and whatever game it was running toward. Vreth thought about this for the entire flight home. He thought about it while writing the report. He thought about it in the dark, alone, with the stars sliding past. He would think about it for the rest of his life. The grand chamber was emptying. Not all at once. Not in a dramatic walkout that would have given Talvesi something to point at, something to fight, something to file under a category he understood. It emptied the way a lake empties during a drought, so slowly that you only noticed when the waterline was already gone and the fish were already dead. 46 species had formally withdrawn from the Galactic Concord in the last 2 cycles. Another 212 had reduced their participation to something they called observer status, a classification that had not existed 6 months ago because no one had ever needed a word for still technically here, but no longer willing to do anything. The delegations that remained sat in their pods like teeth in a mouth that was losing them one by one. The chamber didn't feel grand anymore. It felt like a theater, after the audience has left and the lights are still on, and someone is sweeping the floor. Talvesi stood at the podium. He was older now. His skin had lost the green sheen of youth, and settled into the dull gray of a body that had been wet too many times, and dried too often. His second stomach ached constantly, a stress response his species developed when their environment became unpredictable. It had been aching for 2 cycles straight. "We are here," he said, "to discuss the structural integrity of the Concord." He hated every word of that sentence. Structural integrity. As if the problem were engineering, as if you could patch a civilization with better bolts. Gen Osar presented the numbers. She was a senior analyst now, though the promotion felt less like a reward and more like a punishment. The only person willing to keep counting as the numbers got worse. She stood before the reduced chamber and spoke in the flat, precise tone of someone delivering a weather report for a hurricane. Earth's mycelium network. The name had stuck, passed from Gen Osar's private research into common usage like a virus. Now included 912 species. It had no president, no senate, no council, no capital, no charter. It operated on a set of open-source protocols that any species could adopt, modify, or ignore. Trade agreements were bilateral, negotiated between individual species, with standardized templates available for anyone who wanted them. Defense was handled through mutual commitment, not a treaty, not an alliance, just an understanding that if someone attacked a member, the others would make the attacker's life very expensive. The only rule, if it could be called a rule, was that no species could be expelled. Talvesi watched the chamber as Gen Osar spoke. He watched the faces. The Pelori had sent their most junior delegate, a clear signal that they considered the session unimportant. The Dromene delegation was larger than usual, but half of them were aides carrying luggage. They were leaving after this meeting. Everyone knew it. The Dromene ambassador had the decency to look embarrassed about it. The Scythe were still here. They sat in their usual formation, 6 across, perfect symmetry, expressions that could mean anything or nothing. But Vreth Kolaman, their senior strategist, was absent. He had been absent for 3 sessions. The rumor was that he had been reassigned. The other rumor was that he had resigned. No one knew which was true. The Scythe did not explain themselves. Gen Osar finished her presentation. She stood at the podium and waited for questions. The silence that followed was not the respectful silence of consideration. It was the silence of people who already knew the answers and didn't want to say them out loud. A delegate from the Threshold Compact, a block of mid-tier species who had historically voted as a unit, raised a limb. Analyst Gen Osar, in your assessment, is Earth's network a threat to the Concord? Gen Osar's mandibles clicked once. No. Then what is it? An alternative. The word landed like a stone in still water. Talvesi felt it in his second stomach. An alternative. Not an enemy. Not a competitor. An alternative. Something that existed alongside the Concord, doing the same things, for the same reasons, in a different way. And the different way was working. The debate that followed split the chamber into 3 groups. The first, mostly military species and long-standing council loyalists, demanded action, sanctions, blockades, a formal declaration that any species joining Earth's network would be expelled from the Concord. Fight the bleeding by threatening the blood. The second group, economic pragmatists, trade-dependent species, the ones who could read a balance sheet, argued for reform. Make the Concord more flexible, reduce bureaucracy, adopt some of Earth's open-source protocols, become competitive. The third group had no name and no leader. It sat in the back rows and said very little and was growing faster than the other 2 combined. Its members had already begun quiet conversations with human trade liaisons. They were not planning to reform the Concord or fight the network. They were planning to leave. Not with anger, not with announcements. They would simply stop showing up, one by one, like guests leaving a party that had gone on too long. Talvesi recognized what was happening because he had seen it before. Not in galactic politics, in ecology. His species were amphibians. They had lived in wetlands for millions of years. He knew what happened when a pond began to dry. The smart creatures didn't fight the water. They didn't build dams. They found another pond. The Concord was the pond, and it was. Talvesi returned to his office. He poured mineral water into a glass and did not drink it. He sat at his desk and pulled up a recording. He had watched it before, many times, but tonight, 12 cycles after the event itself, he watched it differently. Dallasai Roanhorse at the podium, dark jacket, flat shoes, notebook in her pocket. We understand. No hard feelings. You've been lovely. He had watched this recording 14 times over the years. Each time he had searched for something, a micro-expression, a hesitation, a crack in the composure that would reveal what she was really thinking. A bluff, a strategy, a weapon hidden in politeness. He found nothing, because there was nothing to find. She had meant it. Every word. No hard feelings. You've been lovely. She had not been performing grace under pressure. She had not been executing a diplomatic strategy. She had been a woman standing in a room full of people who had just voted to throw her species out, and she had genuinely, without reservation, without anger, without the smallest trace of bitterness, wished them well. And that was the part that broke Talvesi's understanding of the universe. Because if she wasn't angry, it meant she wasn't surprised. And if she wasn't surprised, it meant she had expected this. And if she had expected this, it meant he put down his glass. It meant humanity had planned for expulsion, not feared it, not prepared for it as a worst case, planned for it as a preferred outcome. The Concord's rigid structure, its bureaucracy, its innovation reporting requirements, its centralized control, these things were not protective measures from humanity's perspective, and the Concord had just unlocked them. The expulsion was the best thing that could have happened to Earth, and humanity had known it would happen because they understood something about institutions that 400 years of Talvesi's experience had missed. A system that can expel its members will always, eventually, expel the ones who don't fit. Not because they are dangerous, because they are different. And difference, in a system built on consensus, is indistinguishable from threat. Humanity had not fought the expulsion, because fighting it would have meant staying inside a system that would have spent the next century slowly grinding them into compliance. They walked out, they smiled, they built something else. An aide knocked. Arbiter, the Council has asked you to draft a resolution for re-engaging with Earth. Talvesi opened a blank document. He began writing a formal invitation for Earth to rejoin the Galactic Concord. He wrote 3 sentences. He stopped. He stared at them. He deleted all 3. He sat in the dark. The chamber below was empty. The blue light of the central display had been turned off for the first time in recorded history, because there were not enough delegations present to justify the energy cost. He was not drafting an invitation for Earth to rejoin the Concord. He was drafting an application for the Concord to join Earth. He could not write it. Not yet. The words didn't exist in the Concord's diplomatic language. There was no protocol for a governing body to request membership in a network that had no governing body. There was no form for it, no precedent, no category. He closed the document. He finished his water. He went home. Dallasai Roanhorse was on her knees in the dirt when the Concord's delegation ship entered orbit. She knew it was there. The Sol Diplomatic Center had been tracking it since it dropped out of slipstream near Jupiter. Her staff had sent her 14 messages in the last hour. Updated ETAs, protocol briefs, seating arrangements, a note from her assistant asking if she wanted to change into something more formal. She had not replied to any of them. She was checking her chili plants for aphids. The rooftop garden of the Diplomatic Center was her project. Had been for 9 years. She grew New Mexican hatch chilies from seeds her mother had mailed her in a padded envelope. She grew Korean perilla because her college roommate, a woman named Soo-yeon, who now ran a hospital ship in the Ven Reach, had taught her to make sam wraps, and the habit had never left. She grew tomatoes that were ugly and imperfect, and tasted like summer. She grew things because growing things was the opposite of everything else in her life, which was meetings and speeches and decisions that affected billions, and the specific kind of loneliness that comes from being the face of a species that everyone in the galaxy was either fascinated by or afraid of. The aphids were winning. They always won. You could fight them, slow them, redirect them, but they always came back. Dalasai respected this about aphids. Her hands were dirty when her assistant, a young man named Marcus, appeared at the rooftop door. "Ambassador, they've docked." "How many?" 40 delegations. Talvesi is leading." She sat back on her heels. Talvesi, the one who had filed her species expulsion as routine. The one who had set a calendar reminder for their petition to rejoin. A petition that never came. She had read his file. 400 years old. Brilliant. Thorough. The kind of person who understood systems so deeply that he couldn't see past them. "Give me 10 minutes, she said. At her dirt-covered hands, her faded work shirt, her knees stained with soil. He did not say anything. He had worked for Roanhorse long enough to know that she did not do things by accident. She washed her hands in the garden sink. She left the dirt under her fingernails. The conference room was on the 3rd floor. It had been chosen specifically because it was not impressive. Dalasay had rejected the Grand Hall, the atrium, the Soul Chamber with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Pacific. She had chosen room 3C, which had a rectangular table, 12 chairs that didn't match because they had been collected from different offices over the years, a window that looked out at a parking structure, and a coffee machine that was held together with tape and resentment. The Concord's delegation entered in formation. 40 species, Talvesi at the front, his gray-green skin catching the fluorescent light, his posture carrying 4 centuries of institutional authority. Behind him, a procession of beings that represented the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. The Cthulan Economic Bloc, the Scythe Dominion's diplomatic wing, the Pelori Gas Giant Consortium, species whose names Dalasai had memorized from intelligence briefings, and whose faces she was seeing for the first time. They expected a throne room. They got room 3C. They expected an army. They got a woman in a work shirt with soil on her knees. Dalasai smiled. "Welcome. Sorry about the chairs. We keep meaning to get a matching set, but it never makes it to the top of the list. Coffee?" She walked to the machine. It made a sound like a cat being stepped on. She hit it with the flat of her palm. It made a different sound. Coffee came out. She poured a cup and offered it to Talvesi. He did not drink it. He held it the way a person holds an object they don't understand, but are too polite to put down. "Ambassador Roanhorse," Talvesi began. He had prepared this speech. He had written it himself, rejecting 14 drafts from his staff, because none of them captured the correct tone, which was, he had decided, humble authority. The galaxy's oldest governing body, speaking from a position of reduced power, but undiminished dignity. On behalf of the remaining delegations of the Galactic Concord, I come to discuss a new framework for cooperation between our institutions. He paused. He had rehearsed this pause. It was meant to create space for gravity. The Concord recognizes that the current galactic landscape has shifted. Earth's network has demonstrated alternative approaches to interstellar cooperation that merit serious engagement. We are prepared to offer the Concord's full resources, our institutional knowledge, our military infrastructure, our economic frameworks, in exchange for access to the network's architectural protocols. He stopped. He had said the words. They were the right words, arranged in the right order, delivered with the right weight. He had spent 3 weeks on them. Dalasai said, "Yes." Talvesi blinked, both sets of eyelids, which meant genuine surprise. The Concord has prepared a detailed proposal for bilateral." "I'm sure it's very thorough," Dalasai said, "and we'll read every word. But the answer is yes. You can join. Anyone can join. That's the whole point." 40 delegations, accustomed to negotiations that lasted months, to proposals and counterproposals and subcommittees and amendment procedures, sat in mismatched chairs, and processed the fact that the most significant diplomatic realignment in galactic history had just been concluded in under 90 seconds. A Cthulan delegate's mandibles clicked, a Pelori's gas sac inflated and deflated in what might have been a laugh, or might have been indigestion. One of the Scythe, a young officer Dallasay didn't recognize, tilted its head the way Vreth Kolaman used to, and she felt a small ache for a conversation she'd heard about but never witnessed. Talvesi set down the coffee. You have no conditions. No. No requirements for admission, no standards of behavior, no penalties for non-compliance. We have protocols, best practices, things we've learned work well. You're welcome to use them or ignore them. If you find better ways, we'd love to hear about it. And if a species causes harm within the network, Dallasay's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. A door closing, a room going dark. Then the other species in the network stop trading with them, stop cooperating, stop answering their calls. Not because anyone orders them to, because they choose to. That is not enforcement. No, it's consequence. There's a difference. Talvesi looked at her. He had spent 12 cycles studying this species, reading their history, analyzing their behavior, trying to build a model that would predict what they would do next. He had failed. Every model failed, not because humans were chaotic. They were remarkably consistent in their values. The models failed because they were built to predict species that operated out of self-interest, and humans operated out of something messier. Something that looked like self-interest from a distance, but up close, turned out to be a strange, stubborn, irrational commitment to the idea that things should be fair even when fairness was expensive, even when it hurt, even when it would be easier to build walls and let the universe sort itself out. Why? Talvesi asked. The question came out smaller than he intended. Not the voice of the senior arbiter, the voice of someone who was very old and very tired, and had just realized he had spent 4 centuries maintaining a system that answered every question except this one. Why would you help us, after what we did? Dallasay looked at him. She had been waiting for this question for 12 years. Not because she had a speech prepared, because she had lived the answer. 12 cycles. She could still feel the weight of them. The first year after expulsion, when 30% of Earth's population wanted to declare war on the Concord, and another 20% wanted to retreat into isolation, and the remaining 50% were too busy arguing to do either. The emergency UN session that lasted 9 days and nearly broke into fistfights on the floor of the General Assembly. The 3 trade stations they built before Titan Station. The first destroyed by a micrometeorite storm because they didn't have access to the Concord's debris tracking system. The second abandoned after a supply chain collapse. The third sabotaged by a Concord-aligned species that didn't want competition in the sector. The nights she didn't sleep, the mornings she couldn't eat, the specific bone-deep terror of being responsible for a species' survival in a galaxy that had just told them they were not wanted. She had smiled at the podium that day. No hard feelings, you've been lovely. And then gone back to her quarters and sat on the floor of the shower for 45 minutes because her legs wouldn't hold her up. Humanity's great strategy. The galaxy thought it was confidence, composure, a species so advanced it had transcended the need for anger. It was none of those things. It was a woman on a shower floor. It was scientists working through panic. It was engineers building stations out of recycled junk and hope and the absolute, tooth-grinding refusal to let this be the end. It was not genius. It was stubbornness. The same stubbornness that had kept her species alive through ice ages and plagues and wars and every stupid self-inflicted catastrophe their history had to offer. They were not brave. They were terrified. They had always been terrified. They just kept building anyway. Dalasai looked at Talvesi, at his gray skin and his old eyes, and his 4 centuries of believing that the system he served was the only way the galaxy could work. "We built the network," she said, "because no one should have to beg to exist. That includes you." Talvesi looked down at his coffee. It was cold. The machine that made it was held together with tape. The chairs didn't match. The window looked out at a parking structure. The woman across from him had dirt under her fingernails, and a smile that he had spent 12 years trying to decode. He finally understood what the smile meant. It meant, "I was terrified, and I did it anyway." "Ambassador," he said, "may I ask one more question?" "Of course. That day, in the Grand Chamber when we voted your species out." He set the cup down. "Were you not angry?" Dalasay Roanhorse looked at the senior arbiter of the Galactic Concord. She looked at the 40 delegations behind him. She looked at the coffee machine and the mismatched chairs, and the parking structure outside the window, and the dirt under her nails, and the 12 years between that podium and this room. "Who said I wasn't angry?" She smiled. Same smile. The one Koro still thought about. The one that reached the eyes and stayed a moment too long. Talvesi finally understood what it meant. It was not composure. It was not strategy. It was not confidence, or grace, or any of the words his reports had used. It was a woman holding 12 years of fear and fury and exhaustion behind her teeth, and choosing, every single second, every single day, in every room she had ever walked into, to build instead of burn. He picked up his coffee. He drank it. It was terrible. "Thank you," he said. Outside the window, past the parking structure, past the city, past the atmosphere and the orbit, and the long dark stretch of space that separated one small blue planet from the rest of a galaxy that was only now beginning to understand what it had set free, the network pulsed. 912 species, then 913.